Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're taking a deep dive into First Solar, ticker symbol FSLR.
Yeah.
First Solar. We've got a recent stock analysis report, some highlights from their latest earnings call, and a couple of news articles. So we're trying to kind of get the core insights about where they stand right now, and is this a company with a future potential investment opportunity? We're going to kind of break all that down.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack here, and it seems like a really interesting time for the company.
All right, so why don't we start with the stock price? Get right into it. As of March 10th, 2025, the stock closed at $133.11. Now, that in itself might not tell you a whole lot,
Hmm.
but we've got a fair value estimate from one of the sources of $218.44,
Wow.
and even a price target from that report of $207.05. So, that suggests, possibly a bargain here.
Well, that's certainly one way to look at it. That's a huge discrepancy. I mean, is the market undervaluing the company because of some of these short-term difficulties that we're seeing, or are the analysts maybe a little too optimistic in their long-term projections? It's a big, big difference there.
Yeah, and I mean, for context, too, over the past year, the stock has traded between $124.96 and $306.77. So it's been on a bit of a ride.
Wow. Yeah, that's a pretty wide range.
So let's get into their recent performance, the financials. For the full year 2024, net sales reached $4.2 billion. That's up from $3.3 billion the year before.
Okay.
So good news there. However, the full year diluted earnings per share, or EPS, that key profitability metric, came in at $12.02, which was below expectations. So what happened there?
Well, it seems like there were a couple of things that kind of hit their earnings. First off, they had some, warranty expenses related to some production issues they had with their Series 7 modules. And, those are estimated to be somewhere between $56 million and $100 million, so that's going to have an impact.
Yeah, that's good art.
And then they also sold off some Section 45X tax credits, which also affected the EPS a bit. Now, if we look at Q4 specifically, net sales were $1.5 billion with an EPS of 3.65. But importantly, they ended the year in a pretty strong financial position, $1.8 billion in cash, cash equivalents, and marketable securities.
Okay, so mixed bag for the recent past, but what about the future? What are they saying about 2025?
Right, so they're projecting net sales between $5.3 billion and $5.8 billion dollars. And they're looking at some pretty serious EPS growth, somewhere in the $17 to $20 range.
Okay, so that's a pretty big jump from that 12-point year or two that we just talked about.
Yeah, it's a substantial increase. But, I also noticed that the guidance range for 2025 is pretty wide, and the analysis points to, uncertainty as the main reason for that.
Uncertainty.
Yeah, especially surrounding the political and regulatory landscape. We're talking about tariffs on materials and the whole situation with the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. All those policy factors can really shake things up for a company like First Solar.
And speaking of which, it seems like they're already adjusting their production plans based on those political wins. They've reduced their forecast for international production to between 5.8 and 6.1 gigawatts. They're saying that the policy environments in Europe, India, even the U.S. to some extent are less favorable right now.
Interesting.
So, that international production is getting scaled back. But domestically, they're still expecting strong output. It looks like 9.2 to 9.7 gigawatts projected for the U.S.
Okay.
and 3 to 3.2 gigawatts from their operations in India. And to support all of this, they're planning some pretty substantial capital expenditures. We're talking 1.3 to 1.5 billion dollars.
So they're really putting their money where their mouth is, huh? It sounds like they're trying to shift their focus to adapt to all these global changes.
Now, one thing that the stock analysis report mentions is First Solar's economic moat, and they give it a narrow rating. Now, what does that even mean for us thinking about them as a potential investment?
Yeah, so an economic moat is basically a way of describing a company's competitive advantages, the things that protect their profits over the long term. A narrow moat means they have some advantages, sure, but they might not be as strong or as lasting as companies with a wide moat.
Got it.
In the case of First Solar, their narrow moat is based on a couple of things. First, their CadPel technology, that's cadmium telluride. It's a different kind of semiconductor material than the usual silicon used in most solar panels. panels. And it has some potential benefits like lower manufacturing costs and maybe better performance in some conditions. Then there's their commitment to domestic production, which is seen as a plus, especially with all the geopolitical stuff going on. The report also highlights their efforts to protect their innovations, their intellectual property, things like that patent lawsuit they filed against Jinko Solar, and the licensing agreement with Talon PV.
So their technology and the fact that it's made in America give them a bit of an edge, but what could threaten that edge?
Well, there are definitely some risks to their moat. The biggest one is that political and regulatory uncertainty we keep talking about. If there are sudden changes in tariffs or solar energy policies, that could really mess things up for them. And then there are those warranty issues with the Series 7 modules. Those could damage their reputation and lead to more costs down the line. And, there's always the risk of just not being able to execute their plans. Can they actually scale up production, manage their supply chain, and keep innovating effectively? The solar industry is constantly changing, so they've got to stay ahead of the curve.
It's a fast-moving space.
Yeah, it really is.
Okay, so let's look at the positives. What are the big strengths and opportunities that First Solar has going for it?
Well, the most obvious one is that the global solar energy market is just booming. Demand is projected to keep rising for like decades.
Wow.
And First Solar is really well positioned in the US market, especially with those domestic production incentives from policies like the IRA. Plus, they're expanding their manufacturing capacity like crazy. New facilities are popping up in Alabama and Louisiana. Oh, and it's worth noting that some analysts, like the folks at Mizuho and Citi, have recently given First Solar some positive ratings and bumped up their price targets. So there's definitely some optimism out there.
That sounds encouraging. But on the flip side, what are the biggest risks and concerns that potential investors should be aware of?
Honestly, we have to circle back to those Series 7 manufacturing problems. Those warranty costs have already hit their earnings, and it's still unclear how much damage they'll do in the long run. And that unpredictable political and regulatory environment is still a major concern. Tariffs and the IRA are big factors, but you never know what kind of policy changes are coming down the pike. And the fact that their 2025 guidance is so broad suggests that there's a lot of uncertainty in the near term. Investors should also keep an eye on how those less favorable policies might affect their international operations and sales. And look, we have to be realistic. The solar energy market is hot, but it's also super competitive.
Lots of players.
Yeah, lots of companies vying for a slice of the pie.
Now, their technology strategy, it seems like they're not just sticking with their current CAD-TEL technology.
You're right, they're looking ahead for sure. They've got a three-pronged approach. First, they're working on improving their existing CAD-TEL technology, including a planned upgrade to something called Cure technology at their Ohio facility by early 2026. Second, they're diving into perovskite technology. This is a next-generation thin film semiconductor that could be even more efficient than what they're using now. And finally, they're exploring tandem devices, which combine different thin film materials. It's a smart move to diversify their technology portfolio and stay ahead of the game.
Makes sense. Now, what's the word on the street? What are analysts saying about First Solar with their price targets?
Well, it's been a bit of a mixed bag lately. Deutsche Bank actually lowered their target to $265, but Seaport Global upgraded the stock to a buy and set their target at $274,
Okay.
and Mizuho upgraded them too. If you look at the average price target from analysts over the past 6 months, it's sitting around $259.10. All this variation tells you that there are differing opinions on how First Solar will handle the challenges and opportunities ahead.
So it's a bit of a guessing game.
To a certain extent, yeah.
And finally, let's talk about the leadership and if there's been any interesting insider activity.
So the main players are Mark R. Widmar, the CEO, and Alexander R. Bradley, the CFO. It's always a good idea to keep tabs on what they're doing and how they're managing the company. Now, we did see some recent insider trading by the CEO back in March 2025. It involves some what they call M-exempt and F-in-kind transactions. I won't get into the nitty-gritty details of those types of transactions, but it's something investors might want to dig into a bit deeper, just as part of their due diligence.
Yeah, always good to be in the know. So let's wrap this up. It seems like First Solar has a pretty good long-term growth story. The solar market is expanding. They're focused on domestic production, and their technology is solid. But investors definitely need to be aware of those short-term challenges, especially those lingering production issues and the unpredictable political landscape.
Couldn't have said it better myself. There's a lot of potential upside, as we saw with those analyst price targets, but there are also some real risks to consider. Ultimately, it's up to each investor to decide if First Solar fits their investment strategy. They need to assess the company's ability to execute its plans and navigate all of these uncertainties.
So for all of you listening, as you're thinking about everything we just discussed, the financials, the forecasts, the technology, the risks, and the opportunities,
Hmm.
what do you think is the single most important thing to watch in the coming months to really get a sense of where First Solar is headed? What's the key takeaway here? That's something to think about. And if you found this deep dive helpful and a good use of your time, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that bell icon. It's the best way to stay up to date on our latest analyses and make sure you don't miss out on future deep dives.
We appreciate your support.
We'll see you next time.